News.
Good afternoon, I'm Peter Jennings. The United States and Iraq have ended an unusually lengthy day of talks on the crisis in the Persian Gulf. They have been talking, to many people's surprise, for 6.5 hours in the Geneva Hotel, and within minutes we will learn from the Secretary of State Jim Baker and the Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz in separate news conferences whether a political settlement of the Gulf crisis is possible or whether the U.S. and Iraq are looking more intently at the prospect of war. These lengthy talks have been, as I said, a surprise to many people. No characterization yet from the American side on the whole day's talks, though after the first session this morning, Mr. Baker called President Bush in Washington, and the President's press secretary, Marlin Fitzwater, described the talks as substantive. It is possible that Mr. Baker is on the phone with the President at this minute, which is why this news conference may have been delayed a little. We have also had one characterization from a fairly senior member of the Iraqi delegation, which is tantalizing to say the least. He tells ABC News in Geneva this morning, "We were two trains going in opposite directions at 200 miles an hour. Now we are going at 60 miles an hour. We'll try to figure out what that means in the next several minutes. Joining me from Geneva, my colleague Ted Koppel. Ted, any feel for it at all yet?
Well, there is no suggestion yet as to what has happened, Peter, except for, as you've already noted, the duration of the talks. It's difficult to believe that these two delegations could have confronted one another in three separate sessions. They broke twice during the course of the afternoon. Three separate sessions lasting, as you've noted, 6.5 hours without there being some substance. About the most telling story I can tell you about what's been going on here over the last few hours, and there are hundreds of reporters from all over the world who have gathered here at the Intercontinental Hotel in Geneva, waiting for the press conferences that we think are about to begin in just a couple of minutes. About an hour ago, they were gathered around a live feed of French President Mitterrand's news conference from Paris. And there was a lot of laughter, not so much at what the French president was saying as at the fact that the French president didn't seem to know any more than we do. Indeed, he noted that he had been talking to President Bush on the phone, but that he had broken off that conversation so that he could come out and talk to the assembled members of the press in Paris. But then he proceeded to demonstrate that he doesn't have the foggiest notion either, and obviously President Bush had not conveyed to him what the essence has been of these talks between Tariq Aziz and Secretary of State Baker. Well, so we're going to have to wait another couple of minutes.
Well, let's try to get a feel of what is happening at the White House. ABC's Britt Hume is standing by there. Britt, has the President been talking to the Secretary of State after this third session?
He has, Peter. The President was meeting with a number of members of Congress, members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He interrupted that meeting, took the call from Secretary Baker. That call is now concluded, and the President has rejoined the meeting with members of Congress, presumably fully updated now on everything that's transpired and able to tell us, though apparently not intent on doing so until after Secretary Baker has had his say.
And I was going to say, and you haven't been able to pick up a hint of what he thinks, not even a clue.
No, although I must say, Peter, earlier in the day, we saw the President at a public event here. He went over to a little award ceremony. He didn't say anything on this issue. His mood seemed upbeat enough, and it got some of us thinking that he wouldn't be that upbeat if things hadn't gone well. This was after the morning session and after his conversations with Secretary Baker. Upon checking with such White House officials as were willing to talk to us had talked to him, we weren't warned off that idea exactly, but we were told that the President seemed very pensive and told that the whole matter, it remained to be seen how it was all going to turn out. So apparently no breakthroughs, at least, in the morning session.
Well, so far, and I'll remind people again, I rather like the thing from the Iraqis. We were going 200 miles an hour in opposite directions, now we're going 60. The man who covers Secretary of State Baker for us on a day-by-day, hour-by-hour basis is in Geneva, our national security correspondent, John McQueffey. John, I've heard in my ear a suggestion that the Secretary may stay overnight.
There is a very good chance that he will be staying overnight, Peter. I have just been told by one of his aides that they are now trying to get themselves back in the many rooms that they had booked. So there may still be more to come tonight. Of course, there's also fog at the airport in Ankara, Turkey, which is where he was supposed to go, so that may have something to do with it as well. I suspect he'll pull out very early in the morning to make his appointed rounds in Turkey and then move on to Saudi Arabia.
Okay, so there's no suggestion here, as far as you can tell, that there may be another opportunity to talk to Tariq Aziz. What time is it in Geneva right now?
It is 7:45 here in p.m. In Geneva.
So no indication they might talk again tomorrow?
There is no indication of that, but we're all waiting. Clearly, Baker said that initially he would be down about 15 minutes ago. It's taken him longer. I suspect part of that is the phone call he had to make with the president, and also he needs to get his thoughts together to present this in the precise way that James Baker likes to do. When he goes public, you listen to his words very carefully, because he doesn't like to go any further than he needs to. Very, very careful negotiator.
Jack, you're closer to this than most of us. I think a lot of people are surprised today, surprised at the fact this went 6.5 hours, surprised and perhaps surmising that they did indeed get into talking about a lot of things, and there's a lot to talk about.
There's no doubt there is surprise. French President Mitterrand said he was surprised that the meeting went so long. I don't think anybody expected that this would be a hard negotiation, as it clearly has been now, Peter. They have clearly met on certain points. And that's why all the consultation back and forth between Washington and here, Baker trying to find out from the president, one would guess, as to how the U.S. ought to respond to the different things that one can reasonably assume the Iraqis have put on the table.
Well, standing beside you at the International Press Room at the Intercontinental Hotel in Geneva, overlooking Lake Geneva, is ABC's overseas diplomatic correspondent Barry Dunsmore, who's been watching the Iraqis. Barry, pick up on that quote we got out of the Iraqi delegation and try, if you can, to give us any feel of how they've approached this today.
Well, one certainly has the impression, Peter, that the Iraqis had something to put on the table today. That would seem to be the only explanation for the fact that these discussions have taken place for as long as they have. And also, as we noted earlier, the fact that the Iraqis themselves have not been in any direct communication with Baghdad. All the signs point to the fact that Iraq has some kind of a peace proposal, that they presented it to the United States, and that it's intriguing enough for Secretary Baker and his team to look at it carefully, ask questions about it, and to call Washington twice. I think that's about as far as we can leap, but it's intriguing.
I was going to say, listening to all of us now, that we may all be proved dead wrong in the next few minutes when the Secretary of State shows up. But let's plunge ahead for the moment, Barry. You know the Iraqis as well as any of us. Does it surprise you if Tariq Aziz has come to Baghdad and said, here's a proposal that we think we can do business?
A little bit, I must confess. I did not expect that the Iraqis would have any grand design, and as you say, in a few moments we may discover they did not. All of the signs pointed to the fact that this meeting was not going to accomplish a great deal beyond its propaganda value for both sides. It is encouraging that it perhaps has been more than that.
Okay.
We shall soon see.
Well, let's go to London for a moment, because the man who's been listening to the Mitterrand news conference today is ABC's Pierre Salinger, who was once our parachute today. They will surely have talked about in Geneva, is the question of a long-term presence in the Persian Gulf for the United States. There are members of the administration, the U.S. military, who believe that the U.S. military is going to have to stay for a long time in order to protect America's key client in the Gulf, which is Saudi Arabia, which of course has so much of the world's oil reserves. Our normally U.S. resident Middle East analyst, Judith Kipper, is tonight. It's tonight I've left off. The latest count is 605,000 members of the anti-Iraqi military coalition in the Persian Gulf tonight. 540,000 Iraqis arrayed in Kuwait and in southern Iraq. The Egyptian president, Hosni Mubarak, another of those who said today that he hoped this would be the best chance for peace, also said that if the anti-Iraqi alliance was called upon to use air power against Iraq, then the country would be devastated. And to remind you that the Iraqi foreign minister and Mr. Baker have been talking for 6.5 hours, in fact a couple of minutes more than that, in the highest level meeting there has ever been between the United States and Iraq since the Iraqis invaded Kuwait on August the 2nd. In a period of history which many will regard as being just overladen with irony, because Mr. Baker and Aziz, of course, have in the past, or should I say the Bush administration and previous administrations, have been on the same side of the fence trying to maintain a balance in the Persian Gulf at a time when the United States was most concerned about Iran and not about Iraq. And here comes the Secretary of State as literally the world sits on the edge of its seat.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have just given President Bush a full report of our meeting today. I told him that Minister Aziz and I had completed a serious and extended diplomatic conversation in an effort to find a political solution to the crisis in the Gulf. I met with Minister Aziz today not to negotiate, as we have made clear we would not do, that is, negotiate backwards from United Nations Security Council resolutions, but I met with him today to communicate. And communicate means listening as well as talking. And we did that, both of us. The message that I conveyed from President Bush and our coalition partners was that Iraq must either comply with the will of the international community and withdraw peacefully from Kuwait or be expelled by force. Regrettably, ladies and gentlemen, I heard nothing today that, in over 6 hours, I heard nothing that suggested to me any Iraqi flexibility whatsoever on complying with the United Nations Security Council resolutions. There have been too many Iraqi miscalculations. The Iraqi government miscalculated the international response to the invasion of Kuwait, expecting the world community to stand idly by while Iraqi forces systematically pillaged a peaceful neighbor. It miscalculated the response, I think, to the barbaric policy of holding thousands of foreign hostages, thinking that somehow cynically doling them out a few at a time would somehow win political advantage. And it miscalculated that it could divide the international community and gain something thereby from its aggression. So let us hope that Iraq does not miscalculate again. The Iraqi leadership must have no doubt that the 28 nations which have deployed forces to the Gulf in support of the United Nations have both the power and the will to evict Iraq from Kuwait. If it should choose, and the choice is Iraq's, if it should choose to continue its brutal occupation of Kuwait, Iraq will be choosing a military confrontation which it cannot win and which will have devastating consequences for Iraq. I made these points with Minister Aziz not to threaten, but to inform, and I did so with no sense of satisfaction, for we genuinely desire a peaceful outcome. And as both President Bush and I have said on many occasions, the people of the United States have no quarrel with the people of Iraq. I simply wanted to leave as little room as possible for yet another tragic miscalculation by the Iraqi leadership. And I would suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, that this is still a confrontation that Iraq can avoid. The path of peace remains open, and that path is laid out very clearly in 12 United Nations Security Council resolutions adopted over a period of over 5 months. But now the choice lies with the Iraqi leadership. The choice really is theirs to make, and let us all hope that that leadership will have the wisdom to choose the path of peace. Jim, and then Barry.
What happens next? What do your allies plan to do next to bring this message home?
Well, you say what do the allies plan to do next, and I think it's important for everyone to note that this is a coalition. This is not Iraq versus the United States. This is Iraq versus the international community. This happens to have been the first time that we've had an opportunity to find agreement on meeting U.S. and Iraq. So I don't know what the next steps are, Jim. I do know this, that time is running on, as I said a day or so ago. After 5 months and 12 United Nations Security Council resolutions, it seems to me that it is almost evident that the time for talk is running out. It's time for Iraq to act, and to act quickly by getting out of Kuwait. But this is a coalition, and we are seeking to implement solemn resolutions of the United Nations. And so perhaps there may be a way that the Secretary General of the United Nations could use his good offices here in the remaining 6 or so days that we have left. I will say that I've already mentioned that I didn't hear anything that to me demonstrated flexibility, nor did I hear any new proposals. But I would like to take note of the fact that the minister did restate their proposal that the United States pick a day for him to come to the United States and Iraq pick a day for me to go to Baghdad. Those of you who have been traveling with us know what our answer is to that. We've given it over the past 4 or 5 days, and I gave it to the minister tonight. We offered 15 separate days for a visit to Baghdad. The President of the United States made the proposal for face-to-face discussions. We are glad that Iraq accepted this one because we did have 6 hours during which we could make our position known to them. They could make their position known to us. But as far as next steps are concerned, it seems to me that because we are talking about a coalition and we are talking about implementing resolutions of the United Nations, that perhaps there could be, I don't know what the position of the government of Iraq would be on this, but perhaps there would be some room for us to seek the use of the good offices of the Secretary General of the United Nations. Barry?
Mr. Secretary, did the Iraqi Foreign Minister reiterate his demands for what he calls justice and fairness for the Palestinians? And was there any wavering in the U.S. position, as you may have expressed it to him, that the two issues are not related or not linked?
No, there was, he expressed his position. There was no change in our position, which is that the two issues are not linked. I did make the point that I don't think many people believe that Iraq invaded Kuwait in order to help the Palestinians. And if they did, it was another miscalculation because it hadn't helped the Palestinians. I think most people believe that Iraq invaded Kuwait for Iraq's own aggrandizement. And I think most people realize that Iraq is trying to use the Palestinian issue to shield its aggression against Kuwait, which in my view at least remains an obstacle to broader peace in the region rather than a catalyst for achieving that broader peace. And I made the point as well that rewarding Iraq's aggression with a link to the Arab-Israeli peace process would really send a terrible signal, not only to genuine peacemakers in the region, but also to other would-be aggressors at what we think is a defining moment in history. Bill?
Secretary, are you willing, is the United States willing, to talk again to Iraq before the January 15th deadline? And did you discuss with the President the possibility that you may still go to Baghdad?
I had already discussed that with President Bush, and I had already told you what our view was, and the President himself, I think, said there will be no trip to Baghdad. The proposal which he originally made was in effect rejected by Iraq. We offered 15 separate days. They continued to insist upon only one, the 12th of January, which we think was and still is an obvious effort to avoid the deadline of January the 15th, and we're not interested in that. We think this deadline is real, and our coalition partners think the deadline is real.
Mr. Secretary,
I reported fully to the President, of course.
Could you run through for us, you spoke for 6 hours, could you give us a sense of how the discussions evolved over those 6 hours? What did you begin with? What did he counter with? Why did you feel it necessary after 2 hours to call the President?
Well, we broke for lunch, and I think this is, I think this meeting is sufficiently important that I should call the President, and so I did, just as I did as soon as we were finished.
you begin by reading your letter?
But I began by saying that I was here to not to negotiate, but to communicate, as I've just told you. That I was here for a serious dialogue in an effort to find a political and peaceful solution, but that they should not expect that we would be prepared to walk backwards from UN Security Council resolutions, that the terms of those resolutions had already been set. And I told the minister I wanted to handle the meeting in whatever way he wanted, and I gave him the choice, and he chose for me to go first, just as I gave him the choice as well as to how to report to you, and he suggested that I come down here first. So that's how we got where we are here tonight. But let me say that I talked to him about how we saw the situation, about the history of the Security Council resolutions, about what I thought could happen in the event of observance of those resolutions, and what I feared would happen in the event of Iraq's non-observance of those resolutions. He then presented the position of the government of Iraq, and he will be down here in a few moments, and now we can't run through 6 hours of dialogue here, and nobody else will get to ask any questions.
One quick follow-up. How detailed were you about the extent of force that would be used against Iraq if it does not comply with the UN resolutions by January 15th?
Well, I didn't get into things that would properly be in the realm of operational security matters. I hope I effectively made the case with respect to what at least our opinion was of the 28-nation multinational force that is there in the Gulf. Now let's go over here to Craig.
Mr. Secretary, is the United States interested in any sort of phased withdrawal, be it one supervised by the United Nations? And if this withdrawal begins by January 15th, will the United States guarantee there will be no military attack on Iraq?
Let me say, I should have said this in answer to Tom's question. I assured the minister that if they implement the United Nations resolutions, and if they withdraw from Iraq and permit from Kuwait and permit the restoration of the legitimate government of Kuwait, that I could assure him that there would be no military action by the United States, and that I felt that there would, under those circumstances, be no military action by any other elements of the international coalition. On the first question, the United Nations resolutions speak for themselves. We are not here, after all. We are part of an international coalition. We are part of 28 countries, even more countries that have been helping financially and economically. And it is not up to us to walk backwards from solemn resolutions of the United Nations. John?
Mr.
Yes.
Secretary?
Yeah, I'll call on you in 1 minute.
Mr. Secretary, you have said in the past that you would seek approval for the use of force at the highest levels. Are you now at that stage in the process in which you will be seeking the use of force from other governments?
No, but the clock is ticking on, John, and I made that point to the minister today. As far as we are concerned, we have not taken the President of the United States, who alone who alone in our executive branch under our system can make that decision, has not taken that decision. And I'm not aware that any other governments have. Yes, sir.
Mr. Secretary, in the remaining 6 days before the UN deadline, would you welcome an initiative by some other European allies or even Arab countries such as Algeria that would perhaps include sending a European foreign minister to Baghdad to seek a peaceful resolution?
Well, this is an international coalition. Let me say it one more time. And therefore, as I've just indicated to you, it's an international coalition seeking to implement solemn resolutions of the world's peacekeeping and security body. And therefore, there might, it seems to me, be some useful purpose served by perhaps the Secretary General Secretary General's good offices. But I said last night, and I have said for months, we welcome any and all diplomatic efforts to solve this crisis peacefully and politically. We want it solved peacefully and politically. I'm disappointed.
And just briefly, while we try to establish the picture and the sound there, for those of you who are just joining us, it's 3 o'clock Eastern Time. The Secretary of State and Tariq Aziz met for 6.5 hours. The Secretary of State said, regrettably, I heard nothing that suggested to me any Iraqi flexibility in complying with the UN resolutions.
Press conference
Here's the Foreign Minister.
President Bush has been postponed for a while, so I wanted to use the time to talk to you. When I arrived last night in Geneva, I said that I have come with open-mindedness. And that was my intention. And I also came in good faith. The most important fact about these talks I would like to draw your attention to is that they are taking place after 5 months of the occurrence of the latest events in the Gulf. And I drew the attention of Secretary Baker to that important fact. Also that this meeting took place after the last resolution that was taken under American pressure by the Security Council, which makes limits to diplomacy. If we had an earlier opportunity several months ago, I told the Secretary that we might have been able to remove a lot of misunderstandings between us, if there was a chance or there is a chance for that. Because he spoke at length about his government's assumptions of miscalculations by Iraq. And when I came to that point, I made it clear to him that we have not made miscalculations. We are very well aware of the situation. We have been very well aware of the situation from the very beginning. And I told him that we have heard a lot of talk on his side and on the side of President Bush that the Iraqis have not got the message, they don't know what's going around them, etc. You know what they have been saying in this regard. I told him, if we had met several months ago, I would have told you that we do know everything. We know what deployment in the region mean. We know what the resolutions you imposed on the Security Council mean. And we know all the facts about the situation, the political facts, the military facts, and the other facts. So talking about miscalculation is incorrect. We have to convey to each other our view about the situation, and that removes the misunderstandings on either side. I heard Secretary Baker describing our meeting in form, and I say also that from the professional point of view, it was a serious meeting. We both listened to each other very carefully. We both gave each other enough time to explain the views we wanted to explain, to convey the information we wanted to convey. From this aspect, about this aspect in the talks, I am satisfied. But we had grave or big differences about the issues we addressed. Mr. Baker reiterated the very well-known American position. He is interested in one question only. That's the situation in the Gulf and the Security Council resolutions about that situation. I told him very clearly, and I repeated my idea and explained it at length, that what is at stake in our region is peace, security, and stability. What's at stake is the fate of the whole region. That region which has been suffering from wars, instabilities, hardships for several decades. If you are ready to bring about peace to the region, comprehensive, lasting, just peace to the whole region of the Middle East, we are ready to cooperate. I told him I have no problem with the international legality. I have no problem with the principles of justice and fairness. On the contrary, those principles are in the best interest of the people of Iraq, and they are in the best interest of the Arab nation. We have been seeking for decades to have those principles respected and implemented in our region. But they have not been respected and implemented by the Israelis, and in that they have got a continuous, strong American support. If the American administration changes its position and it works with us and with the other parties concerned in the region to bring about peace, comprehensive, lasting, just peace, we will be very glad and very enthusiastic to participate in that effort. Concerning the new world order or the international world order, I said I have no problem with that order, and we would love to be partners in that order. But that order has to be implemented justly and in all cases, not using that order in a single manner, in a selective manner, impose it on a certain case with the view of the United States of America and neglect the other issues and not show sincerity and seriousness about implementing it on other issues. He said that he does not believe that what happened on the 2nd of August and later was for the cause of the Palestinian question or to help the Palestinians. I explained to him the history of Iraq's interest in the Palestinian question. I explained to him that the Palestinian question is a matter of national security to Iraq. If the Palestinian question is not resolved, we do not feel secure in our country, because there have been wars in the past Iraq participated in those wars. Israel attacked Iraq in 1981, and we were expecting Israeli attack on Iraq this year, last year. In March and April last year, we were expecting such an attack. And that was the main theme in the Arab summit that was held in Baghdad late May. Therefore, it is a matter of Iraqi security as well as Arab security to see that the Palestinian question is solved in a just manner, according to international legality, according to the principles of justice and fairness. He said he does not believe that. I told him, okay, test us. You can test us and see whether we are sincere in that or not. I spoke at length about the linkage between the issues in the region. And I told him that when we speak about the linkage, we are serious and sincere. Because what was happening before the 2nd of August has a strong relationship with what happened later. And I told him that the United States actually implemented embargo on Iraq before the 2nd of August. We had dealings with the United States in the field of foodstuff. We used to buy more than $1 billion of American products. And we were faithful and accurate in our dealing with the American relative institutions. Early in 1990, the American administration suspended that deal, which was profitable to both sides. And we were denied food from the United States. Then the United States government decided to deny Iraq the purchase of a very large list of items. That was done also by the British government and other Western governments. So the boycott was there before the 2nd of August. The threat to the security of Iraq was there before the 2nd of August. The threat to the Palestinians was there before that date. The threat to the security of Jordan was there before that date. And that was, as I said, the main themes in the Baghdad summit, which took place late May. So if you want to bring about the situation in the region to that period prior to the 2nd of August, that means that we will be threatened, we will be boycotted, and the political and psychological and media campaign against us would continue. So what's the difference? What's the difference? If we have to change the course of events, if we have to bring about peace, let us address all the issues. If the matter is the implementation or the respect of the international organization, the respect of Security Council resolutions, we have a number of resolutions about the Palestinian question. They have been neglected for decades. The last two important resolutions, 242 and 338, the first was adopted in 1967, the other in 1973, and they are not yet implemented. And the United States and the members of the coalition, as Mr. Baker calls it, have not sent troops to impose the implementation of those resolutions. They have not taken measures against Israel because Israel was intransigent. On the contrary, the United States government has covered the Israeli position, protected it politically at the Security Council, and that's very well known to everybody, and the United States government still supplies Israel with the military and financial means to stick to its intransigence. So if the matter is respect of international law, Security Council resolutions, we would like you to show the same attention to all Security Council resolutions. And if you do that, a lot of differences between us will be removed. Concerning the threats or no threats which the Secretary referred to in his address to you, the tone of his language was diplomatic and polite. I reciprocated, but the substance was full of threats. And I told him, also in substance, that we will not yield to threats. We would like to have genuine, constructive dialogue between us, between our two nations, in order to make peace in the region and between our two nations. When we discussed the question of the mass destruction weapons, I told him in 1990, when this question was raised very, very strongly by the American administration, we made it public. My president made it public. And he also informed a number of prominent American senators, led by Senator Bob Dole, who came to see my president in April 1990. He told them, and he made it public also, that Iraq is ready to join an agreement to eliminate all mass destruction weapons in the whole region, including nuclear weapons, biological weapons, and chemical weapons. And I told the Secretary that you only concentrate on what Iraq has, and you don't show any concern about what Israel has. Israel does have nuclear weapons, and you cannot give me any assurances that Israel is not going to use them against us or against other Arabs. The only assurance, credible assurance, is that we reach an agreement on the elimination of all mass destruction weapons. And I told him, you have got a pledge from me to that, and my guess is that you cannot get such a pledge from the foreign minister of Israel or from his prime minister. And in spite of that, you don't show concern. This raises, as well as the attitude towards the Security Council resolutions, the question of double standards. I told him we in Iraq and the Arab world, we feel strongly against the double standards you use in addressing the questions in the region. When it comes to Israel, you are calm, you are not worried, you can wait for months and years to try to persuade. If they are not persuaded and if they continue the positions, you don't do anything, you continue your support. But when it comes to the Arabs, there you raise the stick. And we are fed up with this policy of double standards. We shall not accept to be treated as a nation as underdogs. We are a proud nation. We have our history. we have our contribution to human civilization, and we would like to be treated in a dignified and just manner. You hear that I declined to receive the letter from President Bush to my president. At the beginning of the meeting, Secretary Baker told me that he carries a letter from his president to my president, and he handed over a copy to me. I told him I want to read this letter first. And I read it, as he said, carefully and slowly, and I knew what it was about. I told him, I'm sorry, I cannot receive this letter. And the reason is that the language in this letter is not compatible with the language that should be used in correspondence between heads of state. I have no objection that Mr. Bush would state his position very clearly. A serious exchange of letters between leaders and politicians can or should contain the position of each party. But when a head of state writes to another head of state a letter, and if he really intends to make peace with that head of state or reach genuine understanding, he should use a polite language. And politeness does not contradict with substance. Therefore, because the language of that letter was contrary to the traditions of correspondence between heads of state, I declined to receive it.
Could you give us an example of the language?
Well, I read it only once, and I have not rehearsed that letter, but the contents of that letter was paraphrased in a way or another in the different statements the Secretary made during the talks. This is the introduction I wanted to make about the meeting, and I'm ready to answer your question. Yes?
Mr. Minister, would Iraq agree to leave Kuwait and promised an international conference on the question of Palestine?
I did not put it that way. I heard such a question during Mr. Baker's meeting with you. I told the Secretary that if you are ready to respect and implement international legality, the principles of justice and fairness as far as all the issues in the region are concerned, you will find us very cooperative. Yes?
Secretary, did you speak with your president after your meeting with Secretary Baker? And is it your conclusion after this meeting that war with the United States is inevitable?
I beg pardon, I didn't get the first part of your answer, your question.
After your meeting with Secretary Baker, did you have a conversation with your president about the results of the meeting?
No, I think the officials in this hotel know that I haven't made any phone calls or overseas for phone calls.
Do you believe that war with the United States is inevitable?
Well, that's up to the American administration to decide. I told Mr. Baker that we are prepared for all expectations. We have been prepared from the very beginning. If they decide to attack Iraq, we will not be surprised. We have our experience in war, and I told him that if the American administration decides to attack Iraq militarily, Iraq will defend itself in a very bold manner. We are a courageous nation, and we deeply feel that we have been treated unjustly, the Iraqi people, the Arab nation, and the nation which feels that it has been treated unjustly for decades, and the nation as courageous as the Arab nation, the Iraqis, part of that nation, and the nation which has a great determination to tell the others that it does not accept to be treated as it was treated. Such a nation has the determination and the capability to fight as long as needs be to prove and to achieve its rights.
Foreign Minister, in your opening statement, in fact, until this very moment, you haven't mentioned the Iraqi invasion and annexation. 1, 2, 3. Mr. Foreign Minister, sorry about that. In your opening statement, and in fact up to this very moment, you have not mentioned Iraq's annexation of Kuwait. I'm curious to know whether you actually ever discussed the question of withdrawal from Kuwait during the course of the 6 or so hours of talks with Secretary Baker. Did the Iraqi side in any way, shape, or form even discuss the question of withdrawal?
Well, the Secretary spoke a lot about the situation in the... Yes. Mr. Baker spoke a lot about the situation in the Gulf, and I made our position very clear. I told him that this situation is part and parcel of a general situation in the region. If you are ready to address it on the same principles, on the same criterion, I am ready to do the same.
Do you deny that Iraq has stripped Kuwait of all its possession, its wealth, its people, its humanity?
Well, you can put your question the way you like, but I'm not going to respond to allegations. The Iraqi people and the Iraqi government have their own historical rights. And when they deal with those rights, they have their own view about it, and they have their own standards about it. You might have a different view, that's up to you.
Mr. Foreign Minister, if the war starts in the Middle East, in the Gulf, will you attack Israel?
Yes, absolutely yes. No.
Mr. Minister, are there circumstances under which Iraq would withdraw from Kuwait? And if so, can you tell us what they would be?
I'm not going to answer hypothetical questions. I have a line which I made very clear in my talks with the Secretary. If the United States is ready to address all the issues in the region on the same principles, on the same criterion, Iraq will do its contribution to that effort in a serious and sincere manner. Yes, please.
Foreign Minister, there have been quotes from Baghdad in the past. There have been quotes from Baghdad in the past, Mr. Minister, questioning America's will and its resolve, particularly given its Vietnam experience. I wonder if you would give us your reading of America's will. Do you think that you say Mr. Baker in discussing Iraq's miscalculations? Could you tell us how you calculate America's resolve at this point? Do you think they are indeed ready to fight you in a prolonged manner?
I dealt with this question at length in the talks. I told Mr. Baker that you have mentioned that in your statements. And I told him that we follow what's being said in the United States, in the Congress, what's being published in the American the newspapers, and that's part of our duty to follow the events in the United States and the world vis-à-vis the situation in our region. But I told him the decision of the United States is your problem, or that's your business, you see. It's up to the Americans and the government and the Congress and the public opinion to make their own decision. We have prepared ourselves for the worst from the very beginning. Therefore, we are not making miscalculations about that. But at the same time, I'm telling you now that any support in the United States or elsewhere for the cause of peace is a noble phenomenon. And such a noble phenomenon has to be appreciated. We do appreciate the reasonable statements made by American individuals, by American politicians about the situation in the region, even if they differ with us, even if they differ with our point of view. We do appreciate that. And in this world, with the development of communications and means of information, people listen to each other. And there is nothing wrong about that. But it doesn't mean that we are calculating on that or making our calculations on that the Americans don't have the resolve to do this or that. That's up to the Americans.
Why not have face-to-face talks with Israel, yourself or the head of state, either in Jerusalem or Baghdad? You've talked about peace in the Middle East for decades. Why hasn't that happened? Why aren't you for it?
About the first half of the question, Iraq is not going to attack anybody, any party before it is attacked. So our action in this regard would be a retaliation to attacks and a defensive action. As far as the talks you mentioned are concerned, there is no bilateral dispute between Iraq and the Israelis. There is the Palestinian question, the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian land, the Israeli subjugation of the Palestinian people. If they are ready to resort to the principles of justice and fairness and to the principles of international law, they have to talk to the Palestinians. And when the Palestinians want the help or the support of their Arab brothers, and they want any kind of support on the side of Iraq, we will be always at their disposal.
Now, given Israeli attack last year?
The Israelis were planning to attack Iraq last year, yes. Yes, madam?
Do you also foresee the possibility of the good offices of the Secretary General of the United Nations during the next 6 days?
Well, several days ago, our representative in New York met with Mr. Perez de Cuellar, and he informed him that he would be welcome in Baghdad if he wishes to come. This position is...
The news conference in Geneva, where it is the middle of the evening, by the Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz, in response to the quite lengthy news conference given by the Secretary of State James Baker a short while ago after 6.5 hours of meeting between the two of them. And perhaps it is